Magnus Carlsen is taking on this young and very strong opponent from Russia, Maxim Zaro. Mind you, Maxim had to beat the very tricky Padu Jobava in the previous round to face Magnus in this round. It would be interesting to see that how does Magnus fare against an opponent who is not at his level. There we have the shake of hands, Magnus starting the clock, Maxim opens the game with e4, and Magnus sort of preparing a surprise on move 1 with a6. It eventually does transpose into the French. Now Magnus is taking a sip of water while Maxim is thinking how to reply Magnus's novelty with. He eventually does decide to play bishop d3. Magnus keeps the bottle and immediately strikes in the center with d5. Now, in these kind of positions, you have to choose which setup you want to go for. You have knight c3, knight d2, or maybe e5. And eventually, he decides to play e5. It's sort of like the advanced variation, just with the inclusion of a6 on the first move. Magnus plays bishop d7. Now, usually, this is a very common idea to exchange this bishop for this bishop in the French defense. Knight f3. Magnus first decides to trade a pair of pawns in the center, and following the principle, he plays bishop b5. Now, if Maxim wants, then he can take and double up Magnus's pawns. But he also doesn't want to allow Magnus to have this open a-file. Instead, Maxim ignores everything and castles, but this, according to the engine, is a huge mistake because Magnus could now trade and start developing because the problem of his light square bishop is gone. Instead, he decides knight c6 first, a3 stopping any bishop b4 ideas in the future. Magnus pulls his sleeve up and plays knight g to e7. Now, he has a very nasty idea up his sleeve. After white's next move, he can take on d3, queen d3, and then put the knight on this very nice outpost on f5, putting pressure on the d4 pawn. And yes, Magnus eventually does decide to follow up with that idea, knight f5. Now, white needs to be very careful. He has to look out for external moves like queen b6, putting more pressure on the d4 pawn. Bishop g5, attacking Magnus' queen. Magnus blocks, takes, and you can see that Magnus is not immediately making his move. He's thinking which way he should take back so that it yields more advantage for him. Alright, so he decides to take back with the queen. Rook c1, and generally speaking, in these kind of positions, it is not easy for you to decide what to do. Magnus could eventually try to play on the queen side with rook c at b5, maybe castle, or maybe just put the king on d7 and start a kingside attack. It's not easy for him what to do. He's deciding, I think he's a bit confused about what he should exactly do in the position. Magnus eventually does decide to play on the king side. Now, what's his idea is that if his opponent takes, then his queen can come king side. That would put a lot of pressure on his king side. Now, Maxim has to decide again what to do. Does he just start developing? Does he take and allow Magnus's queen to come on that h4 square? A lot of decisions to be made by Maxim. And he does take on h4. Magnus takes back with the queen, plays f4. So if Magnus castles king side, he can do a rook lift and go for an attack against the king. And Magnus does castle on the king side. Rook f3. Now, Magnus needs to be careful. There's rook h3, threatening checkmate on h7. So Magnus now here needs to be very, very careful to avoid checkmate in the position. g6. Magnus eventually does cut off the queen from that h7 square. Now, there's no rook h3 because g6 is blocking the queen's view. Maxim just plays rook c to f1, bringing his other rook into action. Magnus does the same. Now, Magnus is sort of he has to be very careful because all of white's pieces are on black's queen side. Rook h3. Magnus goes back with the queen. Now, how should Maxim continue with the attack? There are so many options to consider. Probably, does he go for something like queen g3, queen h4? And he plays the explosive f5 move. And very important for Magnus is to take on f5 with the e-pawn, rook f5, and find this very tricky knight 6 d4 to deflect the queen. And there is no check on the g file. That is the move that Magnus has to find. It is very tricky. The other idea after g takes f5, rook takes f5, it doesn't work. There is the checkmate on h7, and there is no preventing it. So Magnus needs to be very careful. E takes f5 is the only move which sort of maintains the balance for Magnus. Now he's taking a deep think here before deciding what to do. Queen b6, this is a huge miss. And Maxim is completely winning with the move rook h4, f6, and queen to h3 setup. Let's see if he's able to find it. He knows that he has something in the position. He might be able to take down the highest rated player in the world, Magnus Carlsen, if he is able to find the right sequence of moves. Let's see what he does. Will he be able to find it? And Maxim decides to sacrifice the rook. But unfortunately, the engine says this is a blunder because what Maxim had in mind was king takes h7, queen h3 check, king g at f6, threatening queen h6 and queen g7. And what he might have missed is queen d4 check, the king has to move, and queen d2 guarding that h6 square. Oh my god, poor Maxim. I think Magnus has spotted it, that what has my opponent just done? From completely winning position, he has blundered a full rook. So Magnus is like, I have gotten another life, I have gotten another chance. I am completely winning in the position, just making the final calculations to see that nothing is going wrong for him in the position. And yes, he does take the rook, and Maxim realizes that what a big blunder he has made. Queen h3 check, king g8, and remember you don't have f6 followed by queen h6 because of the simple queen takes d4 idea. Now what does Maxim do? He's in a lot of trouble. He's looking out for some saving ideas against Magnus, but unfortunately I doubt that there are any saving ideas against Magnus in this position. Maxim decides to take on g6 just with 10 seconds. Magnus first gives a check. Take, queen g6 check. Now these are just the checks of desperation. He's looking for some way to survive, but unfortunately there isn't any. And look at this bold move from Magnus, bringing his king up to g5. Unfortunately there are no more checks. Queen g3 check. Now after the queen blocks, the queen to e3 is the only last check. After that, Maxim just runs out of check. There are no more checks in the position after queen e3. And yes, he plays it. But king h5, there are no more checks. He's down a full rook in a completely losing position. Maxim decides to trade the rooks, creates some breathing room for the king, but rook f1 check. Maxim resigns there with a smile because after the king moves, there is the queen trade happens, and Maxim is just down a full rook, completely winning game for Magnus. Maxim is thinking that where did he go wrong while Magnus is explaining to him. Magnus shows us that how to retaliate a sacrifice in a very instructive way.